The first thing Jackson Reeves felt was the cold metal of his Remington Model 1898 against his weathered palm. A sound had pulled him from the silence of his hunt, a scream that didn't belong to any animal he'd tracked in his 56 years. Crouching low in the brittle grass, he moved like a ghost toward the noise, each step placed with the precision that had kept him alive through Gettysburg, through Apache territory, through 15 years as a frontier lawman. What he saw made his blood freeze. A young woman hung from a solitary oak, her toes barely brushing the ground, face bruised and streaked with tears. Her honey-colored hair, matted with blood, hung across her eyes. Three men circled her like vultures. The leader, tall with a distinctive scar running across his neck, pressed a glowing iron near her skin. "Sign the deed, Miss Mitchell, and your suffering ends right here," the scarred man hissed, his voice carrying on the dry prairie wind. Jackson's eyes narrowed. That voice, the stance, the cruel efficiency. He knew that man, Victor Blackwood, the same snake he'd arrested 15 years ago for murder, the same man who'd sworn vengeance as they dragged him away, the same man rumored to be behind the murder of Jackson's wife 3 years past. Something cold and hard settled in Jackson's gut. He slid the Remington from its holster, feeling its familiar weight. His eyes tracked the positions of all three men. 2 shots, 2 kills. That's what he needed before Blackwood could react. The girl sobbed as the brand inched closer. "I will never sign," she managed, her voice cracking but resolute. Jackson's finger settled on the trigger. He controlled his breathing. In, hold, out, just as he'd done as a Union sharpshooter. 200 yards was nothing. He'd made kills at 500 in the war. 2 rapid shots cracked across the prairie. 2 men fell before they understood death had found them. Blackwood dove for cover, firing wildly toward the hillside. But Jackson was already moving, circling to the oak tree. "Who's there?" Blackwood shouted, genuine fear in his voice for the first time. Jackson didn't answer. He crept closer, watching Blackwood back away from the girl, eyes darting across the horizon. Then Blackwood made his choice. Abandoning his prey, he mounted his horse and spurred it hard, disappearing into the scrubland. When Jackson reached the oak, the girl was barely conscious. He cut her down with a single slash of his hunting knife, catching her weight as she collapsed against him. She smelled of fear and dirt and something like wildflowers. "You're safe now," he said simply, his voice rough from disuse. 3 years in near solitude had made conversation feel foreign. Her eyes fluttered open, clear blue, intelligent despite the pain. "Who?" she managed. "Jackson Reeves. I knew your father." Recognition dawned on her face. "The Major. He spoke of you." Jackson nodded once, checking her wrist where the rope had cut deep. She'd need tending. "You're William Mitchell's daughter, Sarah. How did you—" The eyes. Same as his. Jackson looked toward where Blackwood had fled, his jaw tightening. "What did they want from you?" Sarah struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. "My land. Silver Creek. They wanted me to sign it away." She gestured weakly toward a paper that had fallen to the ground, an official-looking deed with an obviously forged signature line. "That man, Blackwood, he works for the railroad." Jackson picked up the paper, examining it before folding it carefully into his vest pocket. Then he noticed something else on the ground, a map that had fallen from one of the dead men's pockets. He unfolded it to reveal Silver Creek Ranch marked prominently, with geological survey notes scribbled in the margins. His eyes narrowed as he read. Silver deposits, extensive ones, and a planned railroad junction that would cut directly through Mitchell land. "Can you ride?" he asked, already knowing they couldn't stay. Blackwood would return with more men. Sarah nodded, her determination shining through her pain. "I'm a Mitchell. We don't stay down long." A slight nod of approval crossed Jackson's weathered face. War had found him again, but at least this time he wouldn't be fighting alone. Jackson's cabin perched like an eagle's nest in the pine-covered hills overlooking Silver Creek Valley. Built with his own hands after Martha's death, it was a fortress disguised as a home. Rifle ports hidden in the walls, escape tunnels dug beneath the cellar floor, ammunition and supplies cached for a siege. Living with ghosts had taught him to prepare for the worst. For 3 days he tended Sarah's wounds. The girl had grit. No complaints when he cleaned the raw flesh where the ropes had bitten. No tears when he set her dislocated shoulder. Just the same steel he'd seen in her father's eyes at Antietam, when William Mitchell had carried 3 wounded men to safety under Confederate fire. On the 4th day, he placed a Winchester 73 in her hands. "My father taught me to shoot," she said, checking the action with practiced hands. "I'm going to teach you to survive," Jackson replied, setting up tin cans at various distances. "Blackwood won't stop. Men like him never do." Sarah's first shot missed by inches. Her second clipped the edge of a can. By sunset, she was hitting her mark 8 times out of 10. Not perfect, but enough to make a difference when it mattered. That night, as they sat before the fire, Sarah finally asked the question that had been in her eyes since the first day. "You knew that man, Blackwood." Jackson's face hardened as he stared into the flames. 15 years ago, I was sheriff in Silver Springs. Caught him murdering a homesteader family for their claim. He was working for land speculators even then. His fingers traced the scar that ran from temple to jaw unconsciously. He swore he'd kill everything I loved before he killed me. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. "Your wife, 3 years ago, never proved it was him." Jackson's voice had the cold finality of a tomb door closing. "By then, I wasn't sheriff anymore. Too many powerful men wanted the badge on someone who'd look the other way." Sarah stared at the map they'd taken, studying the markings. This silver deposit, it must be massive for them to go to such lengths. It's not just silver. Jackson pointed to the surveyor's notes. Its location, that junction would control shipping for the entire territory. Whoever owns that land owns the future. The next morning, they rode out at dawn, not toward town, but deeper into the hills where Jackson could teach her to move unseen, to track, to set traps. They stalked a deer through dense pine forest, Sarah following his silent hand signals as they closed in. The crack of a rifle split the air, but not theirs. Jackson shoved Sarah down behind a fallen log as bullets splintered bark above their heads. 3 riders had circled behind them, their horses' hooves now thundering closer. They'd been tracked. "Stay down," he ordered, raising his Remington. The firefight was brief and brutal. The first rider took Jackson's bullet through the throat. The second managed to wing Jackson in the shoulder before a second shot dropped him from his saddle. The third wheeled his horse around, but not before Sarah steadied the Winchester against the log and squeezed the trigger. The man clutched his chest and tumbled into the underbrush. Jackson pressed a bandana against his bleeding shoulder. "We need to move. Now!" They collected the dead men's ammunition in canteens before retreating deeper into the wilderness. No words were needed as they followed hidden trails only Jackson knew. By sunset, Sarah expertly cleaned and stitched his wound while he ground willow bark for pain. "Blackwood's getting desperate," Jackson observed as she finished. "Sending men like that, trackers, not gunmen. He wants us found, not just killed." "Why?" "The documents. He doesn't know what we have." Jackson tested his shoulder gingerly. "We need to find out exactly what we're dealing with." 2 nights later, they reached the outskirts of Silver Springs, a town Jackson hadn't entered in 3 years. The streets were busier than he remembered, the railroad's influence already evident in new construction and strange faces. "Blackwood keeps an office above the saloon," Sarah whispered as they watched from the shadows. "If there's evidence of what they're planning, it'll be there." Jackson nodded. "I'll go." You're too recognizable. We go together, Sarah insisted. I didn't survive being strung up just to hide in the shadows. Something like respect flashed in Jackson's eyes. Your father was just as stubborn. They waited until midnight, when the saloon's raucous noise finally dimmed. Moving across rooftops, they slipped in through a second-story window. Blackwood's office was untidy, but organized enough for a man of his character, maps and documents stacked on a massive oak desk. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Contracts with Pacific and Western Railroad, forged deeds to 4 other properties, a letter on judicial stationery promising all necessary legal accommodations, signed by Judge Harmon, the territory's senior magistrate, and most damning, payment vouchers to Sheriff Reynolds. The whole system's corrupted, Sarah whispered, fury in her voice. Jackson's attention had fixed on another document, a report detailing the unfortunate fire at the Mitchell Ranch. Investigator, Sheriff Reynolds, cause accidental, case closed. Sarah, Jackson said quietly, handing her the report. Your father's death wasn't an accident. Her hands trembled as she read. I always knew, she said finally. He'd written to the governor about land fraud just a week before. She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. They murdered him. A noise from the hallway froze them both. Footsteps, then the scrape of a key in the lock. Jackson motioned Sarah toward the window, but it was too late. The door swung open, revealing Blackwood himself, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a ledger in the other. For one heartbeat, the three stared at each other in shock. Then Blackwood's face twisted into a smile of recognition. Well, well, the ghost of Jackson Reeves. His free hand moved toward his gun. I've waited a long time for this reunion. Jackson's Remington cleared leather first, the shot deafening in the small room. But Blackwood had already dropped to the floor, the bullet shattering the door frame where his head had been. His return fire sent Jackson and Sarah diving behind the desk as he scrambled into the hallway. Reeves is here! Blackwood bellowed down the stairs. $50 to the man who brings me his head. They escaped through the window as boots thundered up the stairs, leaping across to the next building and disappearing into the night. But both knew the truth. Their identities were compromised. The hunt would intensify now. By dawn, they'd return to Jackson's cabin, gathering only essential supplies before moving deeper into the hills. Jackson's shoulder throbbed, but there was no time for proper tending. They needed a new sanctuary. There's a cave system up in the North Ridge, Jackson said, leading them along a nearly invisible game trail. Used it during the Apache troubles. Few living men know it exists. Behind them, smoke rose from the direction of Jackson's cabin. Blackwood's men had found it. Their world was shrinking by the hour. The cave became their fortress for the next week, deep enough to hide them, with a spring for fresh water and multiple exits hidden among the rocks. Here, Jackson finally allowed Sarah to properly clean and stitch his wounded shoulder. My father said you were the best shot in the Union Army, she remarked, tying off the last stitch. Jackson tested the range of motion carefully. 78 confirmed kills. Not something I'm proud of, but war doesn't leave room for pride. Did you know my father well? He saved my life at Antietam. Jackson's voice softened with the memory. Carried me 2 miles to a field hospital after a Confederate shell nearly took my leg. We served together until Appomattox. Kept in touch after. He looked at her directly. I promised him if he ever needed me, I'd be there. Sarah's fingers paused on the bandage. And now you're keeping that promise even though he's gone. A man's word doesn't die with the man who gave it. They spent days planning, analyzing what they'd learned. The Spring Festival was coming, Silver Spring's biggest annual celebration. The town would be packed with visitors, the sheriff's men stretched thin. That's when we move, Jackson decided. We need allies. They found their first in Pastor Davis, who'd conducted William Mitchell's funeral and had his own suspicions about the fire. Through him, they connected with a group of miners who'd been cheated out of claims by Pacific and Western's expansion. Disguised as an elderly prospector, Jackson slipped into town to meet them at the church. Sarah, dressed as a widow, kept watch outside. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Gather evidence from Blackwood's safe, documented proof of the conspiracy, then get it directly to the territorial governor who was scheduled to attend the festival. None of them saw the boy watching from the church loft. Blackwood's paid informant. By nightfall, Pastor Davis had disappeared. The next morning, a note arrived with a street urchin. "I have the good pastor. Exchange him for the Mitchell girl and the documents. Midnight at the old sawmill. Come alone, Reeves." Blackwood. Jackson studied the note, his face impassive. "It's a trap." "We can't abandon Pastor Davis," Sarah insisted. "We won't." Jackson checked his ammunition, loading the Remington Model 1858 with practiced precision. "But we'll do this my way." Jackson spent the afternoon preparing, cleaning every weapon, studying the layout of the old sawmill from a distance. He made Sarah memorize escape routes and meeting points, giving her a folded packet of papers. "If I don't come back, get these to the governor. It's everything we found in Blackwood's office, enough to hang every last one of them." Sarah clutched the Winchester. "I'm going with you." "No." Jackson's voice was iron. "You'll be in position with the rifle where I showed you. If things go wrong, you're our only chance." The abandoned sawmill stood like a skeleton at the edge of town, its machinery silent for years since the new steam-powered mill had opened downstream. Jackson approached alone, as instructed, his hands visible, apparently unarmed. Blackwood waited inside, surrounded by 6 armed men. Pastor Davis knelt before him, hands bound, face bruised but defiant. "Where's the girl?" Blackwood demanded. "Safe." Jackson's voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Let Davis go. This is between you and me." Blackwood laughed, the sound hollow against the mill's high ceiling. "You know what your problem is, Reeves. You still think there are rules." He gestured, and his men aimed their weapons at Jackson. "Where are the documents?" "Not here. You'll get them when Davis walks out that door." Blackwood studied him, then suddenly drew his gun and shot the pastor in the back. The old man crumpled to the floor with a gurgling gasp. "No more negotiations," Blackwood snarled. "I've waited 15 years to see you broken, Reeves." Jackson didn't flinch. "Is that how long it's been since I put you in chains?" "Seems like yesterday." Rage flashed across Blackwood's face. "You took everything from me. My reputation, my future. You were hanging innocent families for their land. Business is business." Blackwood circled closer. "But revenge, that's personal. Like when I burned your wife's house down around her." He smiled at Jackson's barely contained fury. "She screamed your name, you know, right until the end." Jackson's hands trembled, but he kept them visible. "And Mitchell? You killed him too?" "Old fool was writing to the governor about land fraud. Judge Harmon couldn't have that." Blackwood shrugged. "At least his daughter's pretty. Might keep her around after I kill you." From the rafters high above, a rifle cracked. One of Blackwood's men dropped, then another. Sarah's marksmanship had improved dramatically. In the momentary confusion, Jackson dropped to one knee, pulling a derringer from his boot and firing twice. 2 more of Blackwood's men fell. The others scattered for cover as more shots rained from above. Blackwood lunged at Jackson, tackling him into the rusted gears of the old sawmill. They fought viciously, Blackwood with the desperation of a cornered animal, Jackson with the cold precision of a trained killer. Blades flashed in the moonlight streaming through broken windows. Blackwood's knife sliced across Jackson's ribs, drawing blood. Jackson answered by smashing the man's head against a metal gear, stunning him momentarily. They separated, circling each other in the shadows. "You can't win, Reeves," Blackwood panted. Even if you kill me, the judge owns this territory. The railroad gets what it wants. Maybe, Jackson wiped blood from his eyes, but you'll still be dead. With a roar, Blackwood charged. Jackson sidestepped, but his boot caught on a loose board. He stumbled, and Blackwood's blade found his shoulder, driving deep. Pain exploded through Jackson's body. Somewhere above, Sarah screamed his name. Blackwood pressed his advantage, forcing Jackson back against the main saw assembly. The massive blade looming behind him, like death's shadow. With a savage kick, Blackwood sent Jackson's knife skittering across the floor. "I've dreamed of this moment," Blackwood gloated, pressing his blade against Jackson's throat. "Tell me, how does it feel to die knowing you failed to protect another Mitchell?" Jackson smiled through bloodied teeth. "Haven't failed yet." His hand closed around a rusted lever beside him and yanked hard. Gears shrieked as the ancient mechanism groaned to life. The massive blade behind him began to move, startling Blackwood just enough for Jackson to twist away. As Blackwood lunged after him, his coat caught in the turning gears. With inexorable power, the machinery dragged Blackwood toward the blade. He screamed, firing wildly with his free hand. Jackson dove for his fallen Remington, rolled to his knees, and fired a single shot. The bullet took Blackwood between the eyes. He hung there, suspended by the gears, a puppet with cut strings. Jackson collapsed against a support beam, blood soaking his shirt. Sarah raced down from her hiding place in the rafters, sliding to her knees beside him. "Stay with me," she begged, pressing her hands against his wounds. "Not going anywhere," he grunted. "Promised your father." She tore strips from her petticoat, binding his wounds tightly. "Pastor Davis?" Jackson shook his head grimly. "Gone. Blackwood shot him clean through the heart." Sarah's face hardened. "It won't be for nothing." By morning, they'd managed to make it to the home of one of the miners who'd agreed to help them. The man rode immediately to deliver Pastor Davis's evidence packet, which the pastor had wisely hidden in the church before being captured. The packet contained sworn statements about the land fraud, copies of forged deeds, and a detailed account of William Mitchell's murder, all sealed with the pastor's signature and church seal. As dawn broke over Silver Springs, riders thundered into town, the governor's men responding to the evidence. Judge Harmon and Sheriff Reynolds were arrested in their beds. Telegrams flew to the territorial capital. By noon, Jackson lay recovering in the doctor's house, his wounds stitched and bandaged. Sarah sat beside him, her father's watch in her hands. "The governor wants to make you the new sheriff," she said softly. Jackson shook his head. "Those days are behind me." "Then what will you do?" He looked out the window toward the distant line of hills where his burned cabin had stood. "Rebuild, I suppose. Man needs a place to hang his hat." Sarah's fingers closed around the watch. "Silver Creek is too big for one person. It needs a caretaker who knows the land, who can keep it safe." Her blue eyes met his. "It needs someone my father would have trusted." Jackson was silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of old promises and new possibilities. "I'm not looking to replace your father," he said finally. "I'm not asking you to." She squeezed his hand. "I'm asking you to honor him, to teach me what he would have taught me if he'd had the chance." 3 months later, Jackson Reeves stood on the porch of the rebuilt Mitchell Ranch house, watching riders approach across the valley. His shoulder had healed well enough to handle the daily work of the ranch, though it still ached when rain threatened. Sarah emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. She'd grown stronger over the summer, confident in her role as the rightful owner of Silver Creek. The railroad had been forced to negotiate a fair price for a small right-of-way at the edge of the property. The silver mine was developing under proper Mitchell oversight. "Trouble?" she asked, nodding toward the distant riders. Jackson squinted against the setting sun. "Marshal Collins from the Northern Territory. Telegram said he wanted to discuss the Ross gang. They've been hitting ranches up near the border." Sarah checked her Winchester's action, a habit Jackson had drilled into her. Sounds like our peaceful days might be numbered. A hint of anticipation touched Jackson's weathered face as he adjusted the Remington on his hip. Peace is just the time between battles. A Reeves needs something worth fighting for. Together they walked down to meet the approaching riders, the last light of day turning the distant peaks of Silver Creek to blood and gold.